Joined today by Karla Reffold. In 2010, Karla founded Beecher Maiden, an international cybersecurity recruitment company, which she scaled in the US and the UK. It was acquired in 2017 by Nickel Curtin, and in 2020, she joined Orpheus Cyber as COO. Orpheus are a threat intelligence and cyber risk rating company. Karla is an experienced speaker on topics of cybersecurity and women in technology. She hosts her own industry interviews on the Cyber Talks media platform and the 0 Hour podcast. Karla, welcome. Thanks for doing this.
No, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. So you were referred to me by my colleague, Leanne Sarah Jones-Hunt. I understand she placed quite a few people with you at Beecher Maiden when she was in the rec-to-rec business. And we were brainstorming potential guests for the podcast, and you're someone she particularly admired. So I'm so glad that you agreed to do it.
No, well, that's really nice. And Leanne did, she did place a lot of people with us. There was a couple of years where we hired like crazy. So she did very well, I think.
Fantastic. Well, she's a superstar, so I'm lucky to have her. And, you know, you made the comment that you hired a lot of people over a couple of years. I'm especially interested to learn how you launched and scaled and sold your recruitment business. Would you tell me the story of starting and growing Beecher Maiden?
Yeah, so it had been something I wanted to do for probably a couple of years, probably from the point I got into recruitment. The idea of having my own recruitment business was a really kind of key goal. So that had always been on the cards from quite a young age, I think. And I think I always say we got lucky, but maybe it isn't really luck, I don't know. So we started the business and we were going to do corporate governance. So a whole range of different things that I had been recruiting in for a while. And someone said to one of the first employees we had, I think it was employee number 2 or something, hey, you should check out this thing called cyber. And we were like, okay, let's give it a go. And obviously cyber has gone on to become one of the biggest markets that everybody is desperate to get into. And we were kind of lucky to get into it right at the beginning. And very, very quickly we pivoted and only became cyber. And so I would say we were one of the first, if not the first, recruitment company just hiring for cybersecurity. And that really enabled us to scale very quickly and build a really recognized brand as well. So we very much punched above our weight in terms of how many people we had within that industry very quickly.
Amazing. You just going back, you said that starting your own business was always on the cards or something you had thought about. Where does that come from, or what was that entrepreneurial drive based on?
I have no idea. It was just always there. And I think a lot of recruiters think it and think actually, well, you know, I could do this for myself. Like, you know, I think a lot of people do that. And a lot of people, in my experience, don't recognize the structure that they have around them. So when I meet people who've been at big recruitment companies that think, well, if, you know, my clients work with me, if they're working with me now, they'll work with me in my own business. And they don't, right? You don't realize how much marketing you have, accountants, all the legal stuff you need to know, all the headaches. And I worked for a startup business. And part of the reason for that was to learn those things and to see what else goes on behind the scenes that I didn't already know. So I think that's a big thing that people who are thinking about it really ought to think about doing.
Okay, no, makes sense. There is definitely a lot more to running a business than, you know, running a desk. There's so many more facets to it. So you had this entrepreneurial, you wanted to start your own business, 2010. What was the impetus? Why was that the right time for you to take the plunge?
I think it was just the right time in my personal life. Things were quite settled. There was enough cash in the bank to float for about a year and a half. So it felt like the right time, and I'd probably been quite frustrated. I was probably ready a year or two earlier, but life wasn't. So just timing, I think. Needed to have everything lined up.
Brilliant. So you started the business, very quickly pivoted to focus purely on cyber, and then how did things progress from there?
Very quickly, it felt like. I think in the beginning, I had this really clear plan. So we said if we go £10,000 a month over our target, then we hire someone new. So really simple green flag system for how to scale. And that just kept happening. So we scaled very, very quickly. I mean, after year one, I think year one is very much building, getting your clients on board. It takes a while to bring people over, even the ones that have known you for a while. But yeah, after that, I think pretty much doubled in size every year for the next 3-4 years. And that was in terms of sales and headcount.
Wow. So you doubled every year for the first 2 or 3 years. You mentioned, can you just elaborate on this green flag, trigger for making your next hire? When you say 10,000 over target, 10,000 in what time frame?
In that month. So,
okay.
10,000 in a month, we would hire the next person. So the logic behind that was about what it would cost at that time to run a kind of a junior person for about 3 months in terms of their salary and desk costs. So if we did that, we knew that we could hire someone and then we had 3 months above what we wanted to have to make sure we could support them for at least 3 months. So that was the logic behind it. Now looking back, I probably would have made that system less simple. So it worked really well. But I think then as we kind of get into kind of years 3 and 4, we've maybe got the wrong blend of people. So we've hired so quickly, we haven't focused on, hey, is everybody in the business performing? Or at least say 80%, whatever number we would want to set. So you've got a lot of people that are underperforming. And you've got then a real balance. We maybe hadn't considered the balance. It was just like, right, well, we've hit that, so next person. Maybe we haven't quite got enough senior people compared to the amount of junior people we had. And I think that worked when we were smaller, but you hit a certain number and all of a sudden it's a little bit harder because, you as the founder can't keep doing everything when you've got that many people.
Right. That makes total sense. So in one way, having a really simple and clear trigger to hire the next person, I think is great, because that's often founders are not really clear on when should we hire, when are we ready or what's the right time. But then you later discovered that there are other factors to consider. One being what percentage of the team are performing or hitting target, because you might be over your target by 10K, but there might be a small percentage of people in the team who are pulling everyone else along. And so what would you say is the correct percentage? You mentioned a figure 80%. Is that what you would go by now, or?
I think, yes, that is what I would go by now.
Okay.
But it would depend, I think, for you as an individual. Okay.
So as a rough guideline, 80% of people are at or above target. And as a business, you've got 10,000 pounds above target for the month. But then you also mentioned the factor of, do we have enough senior people in the business? Because if you just keep hiring, more junior people without that structure, then you as the founder or the leader is going to get overwhelmed because you don't have enough time to devote to each person and helping them to progress and develop. Did I interpret that correctly?
Yeah, exactly that. And also when people join, it takes them, I think it takes 3 years to be really good at recruitment and to have clients coming to you. And so if you've got 80% more of your staff that are, a year or less, then they're going to struggle to win the volume of work that they need to keep up with the figures that you need when you have suddenly hired so many people. And that's certainly what we found. We were very lucky because we had so many big clients that gave us volume work, hundreds of roles a year. So it wasn't too bad. We were kind of sustaining that, but I was always worried, well, what happens if one of these clients turns the taps off? Then we don't have the people necessarily to go out and really win the volume of work we would need to replace that. And yeah, I think having a few more people with a few more years who could win that work and who others could learn from, to your point as well, so that I'm not having to sit there and train them.
Absolutely. It's funny, that 3-year apprenticeship is one that I've thought of myself, because if you think of other professions, like, whether someone's training to be a lawyer or even like they're learning to be a plumber, there takes a certain amount of time to learn your trade, right? Your trade craft and your, all the little tricks and techniques and things like that. And so in terms of, having these pillars upon which you can build your business, you need those kind of experienced people who've been with you for a while, not just experience, but also experience within the business. I think then you can build teams around them and you can scale with fewer problems that way. So going back, you said the first 12 months were really just putting the foundations in place. So what did that involve?
It involved bringing on new clients, contract clients and permanent clients, really anything to get big name brands signed up to us, working with us, get cash in the bank. What we also did that I think is a little different is we put in foundations as if we were a big business. So we had an employee handbook, we had disciplinary processes, performance improvement documents, all of that stuff that you need when you have a number of people, we had from day one. And that came from having worked in the startup business already, seeing them get to a size where they needed that and having to try and implement it retrospectively, and how everyone pushed back, resisted it, didn't really work. Whereas, that was a good learning for me, that actually if you have this in place when you're a big business, it's no longer a problem. So that was a big thing that we also focused on in year one.
Wow, that's amazing. I've never heard of anyone doing that proactively in advance. I do love the idea of acting as if you're already a bigger company and structuring things and building robust systems and processes, that you would need in order to scale. I'm actually working with a group of recruitment business owners at the moment who are, have a really good small practice, and they want to grow and develop team members. And the majority of them are doing this like as they go, right? Kind of billing at a high level and trying to put these processes in place so they can onboard, train team members and also get some of the work, because they're doing everything themselves and they're trying to put other people in place and build a support team around them. So I think the biggest challenge here, as you described it, you're winning clients whilst at the same time you're writing handbooks and performance improvement, documents and that sort of thing. The big question is time. How did you juggle all those things?
Badly. So once we got to a certain point, this I always tell people is the biggest mistake I made. We got to a point of around 25 staff, and at that point I should have hired probably a HR manager or a training manager or an internal recruiter or something, and I didn't. I went with, no, I can still do this myself. And that was a really big mistake. I think actually putting in somebody that would have freed up more of my time would have meant that we would have scaled even further than we did.
Absolutely. I can totally see that. But you've jumped to 25 staff. Even getting to that size, the majority of recruitment companies never grow beyond 5 or 10 people. So how did you grow? So the first year, how many people were in the business by the end of 12 months?
3.
Okay, so there's 3 of you, and you're just really focusing on winning accounts, delivering to those customers, building that base, as well as starting to develop this systems, the processes that will enable you to then hire. And then how did things progress from there?
You're going to test my memory a little bit, but I think
it's 11 years ago.
I know. I think we were then, it was probably about 6 in 2012. We literally doubled pretty much year on year. So 2013, okay. Definitely by mid 2014, we were about 12 to 15 staff. Mm-hmm. And then 2016, by then we were at 25, but I don't quite remember when we hit 25, but we were definitely there 2016, maybe even slightly higher actually 2016.
Okay. So what was the secret to growing so quickly? Because it's notoriously difficult, even to find good people, much less, train and retain them. And whilst you're doing all the other things you need to do as an owner, you're still involved in, your key clients, your managing staff. You're also responsible for all the other, departments. How did you pull that off?
Don't take holidays, don't sleep, don't go out, I don't know. The green flag system really helped because we were very clear, and it really helped focus. And I think as much as I, just said, actually it wasn't good enough, it was focused on cash. I see a lot of people that focus on, hey, we just won this new client, so we're going to hire to resource it. We were focused on cash. So I think that really helped because we were profitable through all of those years, which again, I think is unusual. I think definitely we got hiring right to begin with. I think once we hit that 25 number, things definitely started to wobble a little bit. But I think we got it right by hiring on values, really. Does this person have the same sort of values that we have, the right kind of motivation, and then being invested in training them. And we had a really good training program at that point. Again, this is where the timing thing comes into it. So timing stretched. I used a training platform, sort of did less of the training myself, used one of the platforms to help train people. It didn't really work for everybody. And it's, everything you've done, all that work you've put to get to that point has worked, but you can't then replicate it at scale. And that's why I think, we should have there was definitely enough work in the market to get to 50, 100 people. But it was the processes at that point. I probably hadn't switched them early enough.
Okay, interesting. You might remember back in episode 43, I talked to Plamen Ivanov, the executive chairman of iIntro. If you missed it, it's well worth going back into the archives and having a listen. One of the things we talked about was a way for recruiters to shift the conversation with prospects away from fees and make it all about value. iIntro has created a tool called the Bad Hire Calculator that you can show to your prospects that proves to them that your recruitment service will save them potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. When you can do that, the exact fees you charge almost become immaterial because you've proved that you will save the client the most money in the long run. If you'd like to add this tool to your arsenal, you'll be pleased to know that I've partnered with iIntro, and they're offering a 25% discount to listeners of the Resilient Recruiter podcast. All you have to do to claim this discount is book a free consultation and mention my name or this podcast. Just go to recruitmentcoach.com/retained, follow the instructions, and iIntro will take care of the rest. That's recruitmentcoach.com/retained. So it sounds like one of the enablers of growth was that you were strong at winning work and bringing profitable customers in. Obviously that's a prerequisite, right? Because growth requires cash. And so why do you think you were so successful at winning business?
We were in a very good space. Cyber at that point, we maybe had 2-3 competitors. We were very heavily invested in branding ourselves. So we didn't, by invested, I don't necessarily mean, paying for stuff, although we did, but it was a lot of effort. So I think we had adopted those things very early. That really helped us. I always said, the brand gets our calls returned. And it definitely did. If we were headhunting people at least called back to hear what we had to say. So I think that investing in branding was a big thing. And the market we were in was a big thing. And we had some really good people. We had some really good people that just weren't afraid to pick up the phone and ask for the work.
Nice. Love it. So when you say brand and, what were you actually doing in order to, be visible and prominent in your market?
I was everywhere. every event I could get to, and podcasts weren't really a thing
No,
then,
that's right.
but any kind of podcast, video, speaking engagement I could get. One of the things that we did, and everyone does it now, although they don't do it quite how I did it, is salary surveys. So realize, you're sitting on all this data that people in the market really, really want. We did really high quality salary surveys, more than just, here's the numbers, here's some insight into what people think, what people want. And I would publish those maybe on our website in like October, December of the year, but they would have been collated in January, February. So I spent 6 months of the year saying, if you want this data, you have to have coffee with me, or 15 minutes, that's what it's going to cost you. And that was a big way that we got in front of people. Love it.
That's a brilliant idea. And so you did the salary survey and used that to book meetings basically with clients. Yeah. Nice.
And speaking engagements, I would go speak on that. People want to hear that. You've always got then very well populated talks that drive engagement. And it was, again, just, people need to know who we are so that when we call, they're picking up their phone.
Yeah. And how did you get those speaking engagements?
I asked for them.
Brilliant. Nice and simple. But okay, so you identified events where your potential customers were attending and just contacted the event organizer and put yourself forward and, these are the topics I can speak on. This is why I think your audience will find it interesting, or?
Literally that.
Great. Yeah. Love it. So Karla, what you had that I think many of us don't, especially when you're launching a business and especially when you're like relatively early on in your career, is you sounded like you have bags of confidence. Where did that come from?
I have no idea, but it's always been there. Definitely borders on arrogance at times, I think. I think I've been really confident since I was a kid. My dad always told me, there is nothing that you can't do if you put your mind to it. And I'm currently reading the book Mindset by Carol Dweck, if anyone has read that. And that book basically says the same thing. If you try and you put your mind to something, you can do it. But, obviously I didn't realize that at the time. But you try and you do things and you're good at them because you're trying and you're putting the effort in, and you suddenly think you're good at stuff. So I think it's a circle, isn't it? The confidence comes from the effort. Yeah,
there's definitely a circle. The other book that is good on that theme is kind of, you could regard as a companion, is Grit. And but the whole idea of which is in Mindset is about a fixed or growth mindset. And the element that people misunderstand about having a growth mindset isn't about just thinking positive and being confident. It's how you deal with failure or not getting the results that you want. And what a lot of people do is then they pull back from that activity or that project or that goal, instead of embracing that and understanding that is part of the process of ultimately being successful. And that is failure and actually not enjoying failure, but welcoming that as something you can learn from. I think that's the key that I took away from that book anyway, Mindset.
And it's why I love the name of the podcast, The Resilient Recruiter. Resilience is your number one thing as a recruiter.
Oh, cool. Thank you for saying that. I actually surveyed my whole audience about when I was brainstorming names, and that's one that just really resonated for me. I agree 100%. So coming back to building the brand. So you were speaking everywhere that would have you. You did this great salary survey with lots of additional insight. You then used that to book meetings as well as those speaking engagements. Was there anything else that you did to really make sure you were everywhere?
We were quite active on social media. We had apprentices doing social media courses, so they didn't cost the business very much, and they were doing lots of hands-on activity. I think that's something people miss in kind of marketing and social media, that actually it's not about big strategic plans. It's about showing up every day in, day out, and just putting out content. And that's what apprentices were really great at. So that really helped. We built a good social media presence as well. So, yeah, I think all of those things just really helped us get everywhere.
That's a fantastic idea. Was that through an official apprenticeship scheme, or like
Yeah, it was. And, I think the UK government, it kind of changes, what it's funding and what it isn't.
Yeah.
At the time, they were quite well funded. I don't know anymore, but they were definitely, it was a really good route. And we've launched marketing careers for people.
Yeah, that is so cool.
Yeah.
Great idea. I love it. So, okay, so you were really focused on just being everywhere, branding, picking up the phone, asking for the business, brought on some great clients, became profitable, cash flow positive, which then you reinvested in growth. And you mentioned we had good people, but you hinted at one of your secrets there was values. When you say you hired based on values, how did you develop your values, and then how did you actually assess against those values?
You know what, looking back now, I'm like, oh my God, it was so basic. But so we kind of, at the start of the business, I sat down and I thought, well, what are my values, and what do I think? And, what's important to me. I had too many. I had 7, I think, to start with. And I had the benefit of having worked for a very large FTSE 250 business as an internal recruiter. One of the things they had was similar thing, kind of behaviours, I think we called them. And there were 3 interview questions for each of the behaviours that you could select as an interviewer. And I was like, great, we're going to just replicate that because it works. So I looked at each of the values, picked a couple of questions that might indicate whether or not somebody shared those values, had a scoring system, and that was what I put in place. Now I think, looking back, were all of those values really my values? I think there's a few that were more important than others. But that's how we did it. And it did help us identify people that definitely shared or didn't share those values. And I was then open to people that came from different backgrounds. They didn't have to be, I want the person that's got 12 to 18 months recruitment experience. It could be, I want someone who's got sales experience or has just that mindset. And that was really how we did it, those questions.
Fantastic. That's really cool. And yeah, I mean, sometimes it's good not to overthink it, and just, it's better to have a plan and something in place and improve it later, right? So you had your 7 values, you developed the questions and then the scoring system. Brilliant. And then, you mentioned that sort of getting to 25 staff was a bit of a milestone where things wobbled a bit. Could you elaborate on what you meant by that?
So at that point, I think we're 25 or 30 people, and I go on my second maternity leave. So I didn't really take the first maternity leave. I was sending emails in labour.
Oh my gosh.
Not sure I should be proud of that, but I am. The second time, I thought, you know what, I'm going to do this a little differently. We hired an MD to come in, to kind of allow me some of that time. And I really took a big step back, and that was a big mistake. I did, take some responsibility. I was still involved in some of the decisions, but a couple of months, about 2, maybe 3 months into that maternity leave, and I'd only planned to take 4 months, I got a call from one of my long-standing members of staff saying, do you know what, you need to come back. Can you come back? So cut maternity leave short early, fired the MD, came back. We'd made some very senior hires at that point, so things were just not as good as they had been when I left, and it was really kind of back to basics. So left the 6-month baby at home, flew to New York because we had a New York office at that point, and I'd really identified America as where we could make big sums of money very quickly. So kind of went to New York, drummed up a load of business, sorted everything out. And within a couple of months, within about 4 to 6 months of me being back, everything was kind of back on track again.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. So first of all, what do you think, like, why was hiring the MD a mistake? I can guess some of the reason, but why do you think that was a mistake, and what would you do differently in retrospect?
I think it was a mistake because I wasn't there to then guide them culturally. Mm-hmm. So actually I was very behind a lot of the things that they wanted to do. But I think now I look at it from the point of view of all of the employees there, and actually the person you've come to work for isn't there. Mm-hmm. The person, someone else is there making all these different decisions. And as much as I'm sending an email saying, hey, yeah, I back this, I'm not there showing you that I back this. I'm not there seeing what's going on day to day and whether I really should support those changes. Mm-hmm. So we probably did need some of them to kind of grow up our processes a little bit, but I think not being there at the time that was happening, that was a big problem. And I had definitely underestimated my value at that point. And I think sometimes you see that with founders, CEOs. You get to a point where the business is expanding, you need to go move on and do bigger things, you need support beneath you, but you haven't maybe seen how much people value you and how they're working for you, and that you stepping back from that is actually a problem for them.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I have seen this multiple times where a senior manager is brought in from a different company, different culture, and it's not worked. There's been like staff turnover of like really valued members, not people you wanted to lose. So yeah, I can totally get that. But at the same time, you did need to have that break when you had your second child. So like, it's a difficult one, no matter how I don't think there's a perfect way of doing this. If you were advising another woman leader who has had this situation on the horizon, what advice would you offer them?
I think bring that person in a little earlier, so that maybe, the last 3 months before I went off, they could have been in there with me. There would have been a better transition. Yeah. I think maybe that would have made a difference. Okay. Yeah, no, it makes total sense. So then the other thing you just kind of skimmed over there was your expansion into the US. So why did you want to do that? First of all, you said we can make loads of money, but obviously every market has its opportunities and its challenges. Like, why did you decide? Because you could have, focused on Europe or other, markets might have been easier. So why America? Great question. So it's 2014, and I fully intend to expand to Singapore. I know everything about the Singapore market, the exam, the cash you need, everything. So, and then all of our clients stop talking to us about Singapore and start saying, hey, could you help us hire in New York or somewhere in the US? Right. And almost like overnight, the plan switches from Singapore to New York. And it's very hard. But very few recruitment companies from England had done that now. Now a lot of them do, because we've all seen the size of the market. It was hard to find the advice of how to do that, but I got a really great guy that was experienced in helping British businesses launch in America. So used him to get us all legal and set up. And it's cheap and easy to set up in America particularly compared to Singapore. Sure, yeah. Absolutely. It's not necessarily easy to scale it, but it's easy to get there. So we were there. Our clients were asking to work with us. Quickly, this has become, like, within a year, the American part of the business is probably now generating about a third of our revenue. Wow, that's a quick build up. So just rewinding a second, regarding your decision to move to America, sounds like it was client-led. You had clients asking you to help them recruit in the US. So that is totally logical reason. Why did you decide to lead the charge and actually fly over to New York and be the person on the ground? I just felt like I had to kind of trust myself a little bit. At that point, things are very confused for me. I've been out of the business for a little while and things aren't where they were when I left. And I just really felt like, actually, this is an expensive trip. I want to make sure I extract maximum value from it. I don't want to send someone who's going to treat it as a holiday. And they probably wouldn't. I was probably being paranoid, but, mum brains are paranoid. It just felt like that was the right thing. And it was absolutely the right thing to do. I picked up maybe a dozen new clients, probably £500,000 worth of business came off that one trip. So it was, definitely the right thing to have done.
Wow, cool. So then how did you, I'm trying to think, there's a couple of directions we could go here. So you've got a new baby. How long were you in New York for?
Just for a week.
Oh, I see. So it was just like a mission rather than you weren't setting up camp and staying there at that stage.
God, no, my mum would have actually killed me. I would have left her with 2 children for that week.
Oh, right.
I mean, a week was bad enough.
Yeah.
She almost did kill me.
Oh, dear. Yes. Man, it's those important people in our life who help to support everything we've got going on. So respect to Karla's mom. So then how did you obviously had a really successful trip. How did you expand from there in the US market?
We had people doing it from the UK market at that point. And after kind of that trip, it was after that trip. It was in the 3 months after that trip, we hired people on the ground.
Got it.
Had very much seen the value of being in the country. Yep. And it was just under a year later that I'd actually sold the business, and we probably didn't scale America as quickly as I would have wanted with people on the ground. But, ultimately did get there, and I moved there because you can fly back and forth, you can do the hours. It's tough, and Americans want to see you face to face. Now that might have changed a little bit, I think, with COVID and the move to being virtual. People don't mind that so much, but there is no replacement for kind of building that relationship in person when you're asking people to give you what could be quite a lot of work and a lot of money.
Absolutely. I think it's critical that you have, if not one of the founders, then one of the senior people in the business actually on the ground to orchestrate that. One of my clients who expanded internationally, there was 3 of them, which made it easier because one of them focused on the UK from Manchester. One of them went to Amsterdam and opened Amsterdam and Netherlands and Germany, and one went to Singapore. And I'm sure that they wouldn't have had as much success with their expansion if they had just tried to do it remotely. I don't think it would have taken off in the same way. So you started hiring people in the US. And what did you learn from that experience in terms of the differences between doing business in the UK versus the US? What's your perspective on that?
A lot is the same.
Yeah.
A lot really is the same. But there are obviously lots of kind of legal, contractual differences that you need to be aware of. I would say signed contracts in America, getting a contract signed early on is probably a bigger deal even than it is in the UK. That was definitely a learning curve for us. If you're going to do contract in America, very difficult. Well, not difficult, that's the wrong way to say it, but you need support. There's a lot of rules that are different that you don't necessarily know. The market moves very quickly, and that is wonderful, right? So people generally start within 2 weeks of getting the offer, which compared to the UK where you're 3 months later, that is just wonderful. So there are some really good things about being in America. But I think just having the right support around you so you're not kind of breaking any rules. Got it.
Yeah, I mean, salaries are higher in the US on average than in the UK, which means bigger fees. Also, I've found clients more willing to pay higher fee percentages. And as you say, it moves fast. People resign and they're starting the new job in 2 weeks. So that's good for cash flow. what you mentioned the contractual part, like what you said that was a learn. What happened? What experience or what happened that made you realize, whoops, we need to get our contract signed before we move forward here?
We probably only had one, but we had one person. And you know what? I think, if I'd have really pushed it, then the law would have been on my side saying, yeah, I'm going to sign, don't worry, it's coming, and then doesn't sign, but you're trusting them, and then we get to offer stage and all of a sudden they want to negotiate the fee down. And you're in a position of, do I take legal action in a country where I don't know the system, or do I just accept the fact that you're offering me this money and I'll take the money now? And that, it wasn't a big amount of money. It was about 25 grand that we lost out on that, but it was frustrating enough to know, do you know what, one little mistake on trusting the wrong person's cost me 25 grand. That one burns. And he's in the industry that I'm in, and I hate him, and I will never, ever help him and will actively work against him. I hold grudges.
I like it. No, for sure. I mean, that happens everywhere, right? But I guess if it's in your home turf, you know what parameters you can work within to resolve it. And it's less daunting to think of how would I even begin to tackle this. So I totally get that. Did you say a year after you launched the New York office, that's when you sold the business?
It was 3 years after launching in New York. It was about a year after my little blip of maternity leave and kind of coming back and getting everything back on track.
Got it. Okay, so before we talk about that, how did you smooth things out with the business after you returned from maternity leave? You said you sacked the managing director, and then what did you put in place to shore up the business and make sure that everything was solid again?
We'd hired a couple of quite senior people that were costing us a lot of money and not really doing anything. And as much as the MD had been a bit of a problem, and looking back, I think he was doing the right things. It just wasn't the right time. But I think those senior people who are clearly being paid a lot and not delivering very much, they were also a big issue for the people that we had, and understandably, like, I'm frustrated, you get more than me and don't bring in as much. So they went as well. And I think that the right people, the people that have been with us since before my maternity, I think they felt like things were returning to normal. And I think it was just kind of that change of, okay, we're going back to how you liked it. That made a difference, I think.
So what was the rationale for bringing in these senior individuals, and in what way were they not performing or having a negative impact?
We'd brought in one person to go into a related market. So we were looking more at IT audit, which is quite related to cyber. And they came in with a lot of experience, but just were not bringing in the work, not doing the deals. And then I think we had 2 others that the MD had brought in. And he was probably right again, identifying not enough senior people for the amount of experience that we had. But you kind of expect them to come in and to at least bring in clients within their first few months, if not seeing deals. And we didn't have either of those things. So they were, I'm not going to blame him, I was involved, but they were more his hires than mine.
Got it. Okay, so that makes sense. So you had expensive people underperforming and also then upsetting the team who are performing. What kind of development plan did you have in place to grow your own leaders instead of having to be reliant on bringing people in?
We had a couple. There was one girl in particular that joined us that did very well. We had quite a few of the people who had been with us from the beginning by that point had been promoted, and we tried lots of different things for them. So some external stuff, lots around just getting them involved with how we run the business and showing them kind of what that plan looked like for them. My plan had always been to sell. Bizarrely, when I sold after 7 years, and when I found the original business plan, it said sell at 7 years. So
it always seems to be 7 years. I don't know. I don't know why. Everyone says sell it in 5 to 7 years. Seems to be the. So that's interesting. You knew from the beginning you wanted to sell. And, but then often what I've seen is that people say, I'm going to sell the business in 5 to 7 years, but then they realize they're not ready at that stage and they decide to delay and hold and keep growing so that they can get more value. Why did you decide that the time was right to exit at that point?
So as much as I had this plan to sell at 7 years, when it came to that time, I had no plans to sell at all.
Okay.
So someone approaches us. So this is the end of 2016. And someone approaches us and says, we want to take like 25% of the business and put in some money. I was like, not interested. This does not feel like it would work. And about 6 months later, I had lunch with them again and they said, you know what? That idea does not work. We've tried it in a few places, like with a few other companies. We're now all in, so it's 100%. I was like, okay, well, this is kind of interesting. It was a good offer. I spoke to a couple of other people, who were also interested in buying the business and had that choice. Do I invest more myself now? I've got 2 children. I'm getting divorced. Do I actually want to invest more money, more time that I don't really have? Or do I sell, let somebody else invest that money, kind of shore up my own financial position and have a little bit more support around me? So it was personally the right time, and it was also the right time for the business, and they were good offers. So
fantastic. So wow. So you, although you did have this long-term goal of selling the business, at the time you weren't actively marketing the business for sale. You were approached, and then it seemed like a good partnership.
Yeah, exactly that. And when people ask me, like, how did you sell the business? Because that's what everyone wants to know, right? I did everything wrong. Everything that they say you need to do, didn't have any of it. Didn't have the pitch, there's no pitch deck and there's no management accounts ready to go present. It was all, pulled together very last minute.
Hilarious.
The contract book was not where it needs to be. Succession plan's not where it needs to be. And yet,
it still worked. Great. Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, I have a program that I created with one of my mentors, Romney Ross, and it's called Recruitment Growth Accelerator. And we have a module in there about how to have a successful exit, not based on my experience, but based on his, both as an acquirer as well as someone who's floated companies and done trade sales. And he has these, I think it's 8 factors which reduce the value of your business, and then 10 factors that increase the value of your business. And you go through this checklist of like, what can we put in place to make sure that we capture the most value. So there are definitely things you can do, but yours sounds like it came about more spontaneously. But then you stayed in the business for another, 2-3 years after that?
Yeah, I did.
Why and how did that work out?
So I think the big reason that we managed to sell the business in the way that we did is the market we were in, and we really complemented the acquiring business. So we had America, they had Asia. We had cyber, they had banking. It really complemented. Crucially, values between me and the person who bought us were very, very aligned. We got on very well. We were very good at working together. And that was the reason I sold to them and not a couple of people who actually made bigger offers, but I just could not stand the idea of working with. And I had no earnout. I did have an earnout, but I didn't have to stay with the business to get it. I stayed because I kind of believed in the growth and what we were doing. It also gave me opportunities to work in a much bigger business and have a very senior role in a bigger business as well. So there were some good things in there for me. And honestly, the transition was super smooth. It never felt like it wasn't my business, even though it wasn't. So
amazing.
It was like doing it all, but without the stress.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So then you stayed with that business until 2020, I think. And then tell me how you came to join Orpheus, because a lot of this is the topic of careers beyond recruiting, I think is an interesting one. People don't necessarily stay in recruitment for life, and it can be a great vehicle or to develop yourself and then be positioned to take advantage of other opportunities. So how did that How did that come about for you?
So there are a few things in there. So the first thing I think is, at this point, I'm not really a recruiter. I haven't really been a recruiter for a long time. I'm a business leader. So actually leading any other business is not a big transition for me. I'm also very well known at this point because I've gone to all these events and forced them to let me speak within the cybersecurity space. So I know a lot about cyber. So actually this transition is not a big jump. Kind of going back to what I'd said, the person who had bought the business was stepping away a little bit from the company. And, you know, I really valued their input. I didn't value the company so much. So actually this was becoming a business I didn't really want to be in. But I'm moving to America, so it's kind of making sense to stay. But then we have COVID and things very much change. And actually all of those negative elements of the company I'm at accelerate. So it's very much just the right time for me to go progress my career. And cyber is booming. And it was all through kind of my network. So I had a couple of people that made introductions for me, and the role at Orpheus kind of didn't exist, but was not quite created. I think it was obviously something they were looking at, but had met me and felt like it was the right fit, so decided to put that role in.
So what was attractive, Karla, for you about the position with Orpheus Cyber?
Firstly, it's a really great business in a very great niche of cyber. So cyber is niche in itself, right? But actually then there's a dozen niches within it, and they're in two growth areas. Cyber risk ratings are huge for organizations, particularly when you think about insurance and ransomware and how that plays into that. And so is threat intelligence. That's very much valued. And they have some of the highest kind of accreditations in that space. So for me, it was a really great business in the market. And as recruiters, you see a lot of them, right? You know which ones look good and which ones don't. So I was very excited about them as a company, and kind of again with my theme all the way through, values of their CEO very much aligned.
Amazing. And so what is your mission as COO? What are you trying to accomplish at Orpheus?
I do a lot at the moment. I think that's going to change soon. We're growing very, very quickly. So when I joined, it was around marketing, it was around HR and strategic partnerships. And we now have, I'm not entirely sure, but I think we've got maybe double or more the amount of partnerships we had when I joined. Not all me, of course, but the business is growing very quickly. We've done very well on our marketing and our branding. So I think my role might have to narrow a little bit, learning the mistakes from the past of trying to do everything. And we are expanding into America as well. So my role will focus more on America than it has.
Fantastic. It sounds exciting. One more question I wanted to ask you, Karla, while I've got you, is the challenge of being a young female founder, particularly in tech. Can you talk a little on that?
Yes, very much. So, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, actually. I've got an article coming out in a cyber magazine about this sort of thing. So I remember being, when I was young, right? I was early 20s when I started the business. So I remember being in rooms with people who would literally say, "You're very young, aren't you?" Like
wow,
that to me.
So condescending.
And I think really what they mean is, and what they really mean is, very female, aren't you? And the industry has changed, but I would say back when I started in it, being in your 30s and white and a man was very much the industry, and it's not quite like that anymore. I think we are a little more diverse, and those men, I have also come to learn, are also more diverse in their thinking and their tolerances. There's no negativity there, but at the time it didn't feel that way. And I think that contributes to this feeling that you don't quite belong in your industry. Cyber as well, very male dominated. When you're a recruiter, you're in an industry, but you're not. You're an outside supplier to that industry. So there was definitely this feeling of not quite belonging. And those sort of feelings are great for me. They really make me angry and kind of power the success and that confidence that we talked about. But it's hard, and actually if you don't have that attitude, I think it can be really, really hard.
Interesting. So in what way did you use that as fuel to become even more successful? Like what was that? Was that a conscious thought process, or do you think that's just the way that you respond to adversity?
Maybe a bit of both, but I think when someone tells me I can't, when someone makes it clear they don't see the value, when they're underestimating me, that to an extent is very motivating, because you have the chance to go prove somebody wrong. And if anything, I've probably lost that as I've got older, because I now just don't care about their opinions. But
that's one of the benefits of getting older, for sure.
But at the time, that was how I used it, and I think continue to use it to an extent, because I definitely get it now. Making that transition, I've had a couple of people say, "Wow, how does a recruiter become a COO?" I'm like, well, you know what? I founded a 7-figure business and sold it for a really decent multiple. That's how. But you go ahead.
Love it. That is a brilliant answer, Karla. Well, look, we're out of time for today. I've really enjoyed getting to meet you. So thank you so much for being on The Resilient Recruiter and sharing your journey. Fascinating. And I hope we get the opportunity to talk again.
Thank you.